Here is how to strategically cut cost in your business without shrinking your company. Very often we come across scenarios where people want to take cost out of their business. Their cost base is just too high and they need to look at what they're doing and how they're working with an aim to reducing costs and ultimately increasing their profits. But often we see cost cutting done in particularly bad ways. Very often the first thing that people look at is reducing headcount. And what they don't do is look strategically at their headcount and what the headcount is doing. Rather, they just look at the numbers that they're employing and then they start to reduce those numbers. And that can have harmful effects on the business. Often what happens is headcount is reduced and the upshot is that work hasn't gone away. The systems haven't been made more efficient, the work is still there, and then what happens is the existing employees and the existing team then have to pick up that workload. That then creates morale issues, retention issues because people leave, and doesn't necessarily improve efficiency within the firm. So what we always say is make sure that any kind of cost reduction is done in a sustainable and strategic way. And so these are things, what I'm going to run through now are the things that you can potentially do in your organisation to take costs out that don't just purely focus on reducing headcount. The first one is look at your tech stack and look at your IT. Is that IT, is it up to date? Have people been trained on it? Has it been implemented properly? Because if any of those factors haven't happened, then potentially that's going to create inefficiencies in your business rather than efficiencies. So you need to look at your IT stack and see what you can do there. The second one to take cost out of your business is supplier negotiations. So have you revisited all your supplier contracts with a view to negotiating those contracts? Often it's those contracts with long-term standing suppliers which are often the most efficient. Over time those suppliers have got complacent, they might not give you the best deals, the best prices, so you do need to revisit those negotiations with your suppliers, particularly those longer-term suppliers where you've had the longer-term relationships with. Another area to take cost out of your business in a strategic way is looking at hybrid working and being creative with your workforce. Office space is expensive. COVID brought in a whole new change when people were looking at where people were based, and the hybrid model now has really taken off. And that obviously does take cost out because you haven't got to provide office space and desk space for your team. Another area to potentially take cost out of your business is outsourcing. So, outsourcing those functions which are not core to your business. So common ones to outsource are finance, so you outsource your finance team, HR, IT. Again, you're outsourcing it to experts, which means you don't then have to pay for full-time experts within your company. You can then just draw on those skills as and when you need them. So that again should reduce your cost base. So what are the other trends that we're seeing in cost-based reduction? So the obvious one, is AI. Everyone's jumping on the AI bandwagon, but there are clearly some tangible cost savings to be had there. Some sort of very sort of simple things like the chatbots, from the chatbots monitoring your emails, from monitoring your conference calls and bringing all those notes together. Again, it's just taking away some of that manual administration that you would normally paying somebody to do. The second area is making sure that you've got good IT and cloud-based systems. We still see a lot of people using legacy systems in their organisation, which frankly expensive, inefficient. So that having that audit of your IT stack is really important as well. Things that you shouldn't do. I mentioned at the beginning, but things you shouldn't do. I often see people take an axe to things like marketing. It's a very sort of common thing to trim when things get tough. Marketing, advertising, tend to get trimmed back, and I've certainly worked in organisations where that has been the case. And it's an obvious point, but those are the things that you probably, the last things you really want to be cutting back on. If your business is going through potential difficulties, potentially you're not growing your top line, then you don't want to be cutting back on things like advertising and marketing. And also the other thing you've got to be very aware of is customer service. We live in an age now where we are driven by customer reviews. If you're in a service-based industry, that customer experience is really, really important. And we've probably all experienced an element of this. Is people go through cost savings, they take out costs. What it impacts on is customer service. Customers get fed up, they get frustrated, they leave negative reviews, because they can't get the service they want. And that's often a symptom of the business being short-sighted and making short-term cost-saving measures and not looking at the bigger picture. So again, focus on that customer service element. So hopefully those sort of tips and hints have been useful to you. If they have been, please like and subscribe to our channel.